shill bidding or bid pumping, right? People that just pump the numbers. Maybe it's PWCC's affiliates. Maybe it's the people that actually submitted those cards. Maybe it's just people that have a big stake in those cards, right? Since it's so popular, it attracts a lot of the flies, if you will, or a lot of the sharks out there. Hey, what's going on, folks? Welcome back to the Parkside Merchant channel. Got sort of an interesting video here today. I wanted to talk a little bit about consignment services, particularly PWCC, and give you just some of my opinion and thoughts about whether or not it makes sense to use those sorts of services. So I recognize this is going to be a somewhat controversial topic. A lot of people are going to have different opinions about this. I do believe that this is very much a case-by-case sort of a decision, so I hesitate to speak with too many generalizations about what people should or shouldn't do. Just take this as kind of some of my opinions about how I would think about whether or not to use a consignment service if I had some trading cards that I was trying to sell. So what I'm going to do in this video is talk a little bit about some questions that I think you should consider before you would engage a consignment service like PWCC. And then I'm going to talk more specifically about some of the pros and cons associated with using these kinds of services. So let's just go ahead and dive in, okay? Let's say you've got a graded card, probably something that you think will sell, right? A PSA 8, PSA 9, PSA 10 probably, of some kind of a card that you think there's demand for. Maybe it's a Yugioh card, it's a Pokemon card, it's a sports card, whatever, right? The first question that you generally want to think about with respect to these kinds of decisions, are you established and are you experienced on eBay? And that's very important, right? Do you have an eBay account? Do you have all your PayPal and managed payments and all that infrastructure configured? Do you have feedback score on eBay? In other words, are you very new to eBay? Do you only have a couple of stars on your feedback account? If you're a real noob on eBay, people may not want to do business with you, right? Even if you have a great card that's listed, if you're brand new, people might be a little nervous, right? And they may be inclined not to purchase from you. So it is very important that you are established on eBay, that you have positive feedback. If you're somebody that has been unfortunately cursed with negative feedback, that's a problem too. Even if you have hundreds of feedbacks, if you've got several really nasty reviews on your eBay page, that's a turnoff to a lot of people. And it also will deprioritize your listings in the eBay algorithm. If you're somebody that consistently gets tanked in your eBay reviews, they're not going to promote your stuff as much as other people that have positive feedback, which means that even if you have a great card, and even if you have a lot of feedback on eBay, your stuff may still not get connected with the people searching for it, because the algorithm is deliberately going to deprioritize you if you have terrible feedback on your eBay page. So you got to think about that first, right? Are you on eBay? Do you have good feedback? Do you have a lot of feedback? Are you a seller that somebody at first blush would want to do business with on eBay? That's the first question you should ask yourself. Next question. Are you willing to deal directly with buyers? Anybody who sells on eBay knows that dealing with buyers is a very unpleasant experience oftentimes. Buyers have a lot of power on eBay. They have a lot of negotiating ability, and they have a lot of ability to be predatory with sellers. All kinds of things that buyers can do. Lots of gimmicks, lots of tricks, especially with very expensive high-ticket items like trading cards. So you need to ask yourself, are you prepared to deal directly with buyers? For some people, they're not. They think they are, but they are not ready for that. So you got to think about that, right? Would you prefer to just pawn off the experience of dealing with a buyer to some kind of an intermediary or a middleman? And I think for a lot of folks, I mean, if you've been on eBay for several months, you know how it goes, right? You get fleeced all the time by people that are just scam artists on eBay. So you got to give that question a real heavy amount of thought, in my opinion, especially if you've got a really expensive card. I mean, is that something that you're going to want to sell yourself? Are you going to ship international? You know, if you get returns, are you prepared to deal with that? It's just like a lot of stuff you got to think about when it comes to dealing with buyers. The next thing you need to think about is how fast do you need the money? Now, what is nice to eBay's credit is that once you sell something, right, and the buyer pays, they are pretty quick, even with the managed payments, in clearing a payment and getting you your money. Sometimes these consignment services, as we'll talk about, take a while. And it's just because it's a middleman, right? They've got a lot of paperwork and a lot of stuff they've got to do in order to clear their payments and make sure that you get your money. So if you need the money fast, you may be better off just selling it yourself than having to ship it out to a consignment, wait for the next auction round, wait for the money to clear, right? There's a whole lot of time to return that you may need to think about if you need the money fast. Next question. Is your card a hot card, or like a hot ticket, high ticket sort of an item? Because at the end of the day, if you're just selling some junk, you know, some graded commons, some kind of an unlimited card, or just something that there isn't a lot of appetite for, and it's not going to sell for a lot of money, why bother going through a consignment service, right? If it's a real cheap thing that you're barely going to get any bids on, you may as well just sell it yourself, because that's not the kind of thing that attracts a lot of bidders, a lot of watchers, and that sort of stuff doesn't actually attract a lot of scam artists either. It's the expensive stuff that attracts all the scammers. So if you're dealing with something that's not very popular and you're not going to make a lot of money off of it, you may as well just sell it yourself, because you're much likely to just, you know, have a pretty positive experience on eBay selling cheap stuff. When you sell expensive stuff, that's when you get into a lot of problems on eBay. So I think the bottom line, guys, on these 4 questions is, if you're inexperienced on eBay, if you don't like dealing with buyers directly, if you don't really care how fast you get the money, and if you have a card that's pretty hot, that's going to attract a lot of watchers and get a lot of bids, that's probably a good fit for a consignment service. Now, if you're somebody who's got hundreds of feedback on eBay, you have a good audience, you never have trouble getting watchers on your items, you get good feedback, people trust you, you don't mind dealing with buyers, even the scam artists, you prefer to generally have your money as fast as possible, and your cards are kind of a mixed bag of stuff that's hot as well as stuff that's just kind of secondary priority, then you may want to just list it yourself if you're established and you don't mind doing these things. So that's kind of the bottom line on these questions. Now let's pivot and talk a bit about some of the pros and cons of using a consignment service like PWCC. So the first pro with these services is that you have top-tier visibility. You get a lot of audience. This is undeniable, right? If you look at the watch counts for when they do these auction rounds, especially for Yugioh, and I'm sure it's true for sports cards, right? Everybody knows PWCC, and everybody who's in this market is generally going to take a look at what's up for auction in each of these rounds that they do. They may not bid on everything, but everybody's going to take a look and just see if there's something that they like. So if you really need a lot of audience and you want a lot of visibility and you want to maximize the exposure of your item, this is the way to do it, right? There's basically there are some exceptions. Some people get really lucky if they have a good listing and for whatever reason, maybe they promote their item on eBay or they do something that gets it a lot of promotion in the algorithm. You can get a lot of watchers on eBay on stuff sometimes, but if you really want to get a lot of people to look at it, these are usually a pretty foolproof way to do that. With visibility and with audience always comes higher prices, right? There is a direct and almost causal relationship between more watchers, more bidders, more competition, higher prices. That's just kind of the nature of auctions, right? The more people that are sitting in the auction house, the more likely you are to get bids and the more likely you are to get competition, right? Bidding wars and stuff. So you do often see, I think, with PWCC that the closing prices generally are a bit higher than what you would have in an auction if you did it yourself. And a lot of times the all-time high prices do come from some of these PWCC auctions as well as the PWCC vault, which is sort of like their buy it now sort of options and all the different tools that they have for people that like to sell. You know, another big pro, if you look at a lot of the forums and a lot of the Reddit pages and things, people do often talk about how PWCC has a very organized, kind of a user-friendly interface. So I've never used PWCC myself, but It sounds like they do have a pretty seamless, pretty easy process. They've really tried to engineer this experience to be very seller friendly for the people that want to auction their cards or sell their cards. So it sounds like, I mean, for what it's worth, it's going to be a pretty smooth experience if people do decide to send their cards to PWCC. And this is the big pro here, number 4, right? A lot of folks love this. You don't have to deal with buyers directly. If you have a middleman, if you have a consignment service, you've never got to deal with all those nasty messages and all the item not as described and all that crap, right? That all gets pawned off to PWCC, the middleman, the intermediary that's going to do all the negotiation and interaction with the buyers on your behalf. So I know for a lot of people, that bullet there alone is enough to justify sending all their stuff to PWCC, because some people really hate having to deal with buyers. And for people that really hate that sort of stuff, this is obviously a really good way to go. Now let's talk a bit about some of the downsides to using these consignment services. The first one, kind of obvious, is that you have a lot of consignment fees and charges. Now, I'm not going to go through here and relitigate and go through in a whole bunch of detail some kind of a blow-by-blow comparison of if you go it alone on eBay with their managed payments for certain items, you know, what's your final percent going to look like versus if you go through a consignment service. I honestly don't have the time to like do all the math and all the comparative, but it stands to reason that the more middlemen that you involve in a transaction, generally speaking, you're going to probably pay higher percentages, or you're going to have to give out a bigger cut of the final value than if you just sell it yourself on eBay. And people complain a lot about the eBay fees and things like that, but at the end of the day, it is a pretty clean cut and pretty simple formula for the transaction fees and such on eBay. And it's kind of been simplified as well with the managed payments, so you don't have to worry about a separate line item for all the PayPal stuff separately. So in my opinion, it's probably, at the end of the day, you're probably going to wind up giving out a smaller percentage if you just sell it yourself. I could be mistaken on this. Feel free to correct me in the comments if you strongly believe otherwise. But I mean, if PWCC uses eBay, which means PWCC has to pay eBay certain transaction fees, which is almost necessarily means that there's a premium that PWCC is charging over just the conventional eBay fees. But feel free to correct me. My opinion, though, would be I'd probably just go the route of going with eBay if I was somebody that was really concerned about consignment fees and charges and such. The other potential con with PWCC is that the auctions end within seconds of each other a lot of times. I have personally been a victim of this when I've been trying to bid on things in the PWCC auctions. There sometimes are a couple cards that you're going after, and they all typically end, I think it's like 8:30 Pacific or 11:30 p.m. Eastern for a lot of this stuff. You'll have like 6 different tabs open with all these different auctions, and you'll have to just pick one basically that's going to be the one you really fight it out in. The rest of them you just have to kind of chalk up if you don't want to bid on the rest of the stuff. So it does kind of suck to a degree that it all ends like within seconds, because if you are a serious bidder, which a lot of folks are, if you follow the PWCC auctions, you're the kind of people that usually are pretty serious, pretty high dollar bidders. You know, you get basically blocked out because you can only in real time bid on like 2 or 3 things at a time. If you have your phone and you get your, you know, your desktop or whatever, it's just can be a very frenzied experience when those auctions close. And it actually can result in probably lower prices than what could be possible. So it's just kind of a weird quirk with PWCC that you have to be mindful about. So another con is, I mentioned this a second ago, but there is kind of a lag for the payout. I don't really know exactly how long it is, but it stands to reason, right, that there would be sort of a lag here, because you got to send your cards out, you got to wait for all these auctions to close, you got to wait for PWCC to ship out all this stuff, you got to wait for them to handle all their paperwork and their tax information and their back office infrastructure and all that sort of stuff. So you hear anecdotally that it often takes about 2 months for people to get their full payout for a lot of these cards after the auctions have closed. So it is what it is. I mean, at the end of the day, if you don't really care, that's kind of a non-issue. But if you need the money fast, this may not be the best route to go. And the last thing that is a potential con for PWCC, it's more of a pro if you're a seller, because you only benefit from having high prices. But for somebody that is a buyer, or for people that are skeptical about PWCC, there is a lot of allegations about shill bidding or bid pumping, right? People that just pump the numbers. Maybe it's PWCC's affiliates. Maybe it's the people that actually submitted those cards. Maybe it's just people that have a big stake in those cards, right? If somebody owns a lot of copies of Karibo, they may go in there, parachute into the PWCC auctions, and just pump the hell out of those auctions and just drive up the numbers, right? And so this is a problem with PWCC because since it's so popular, it attracts a lot of the flies, if you will, or a lot of the sharks out there. The bid pumpers, right? The shill bidders who just go in there and just beef the numbers on these cards because they're just trying to either beat the drum on a card or a box or some inventory that they personally have a huge stake in. Or it's the sellers and the cronies themselves who are just pumping their own auctions on PWCC. So that can create some apprehension in the bidding community. And the other thing that sucks about these, I didn't mention this, but you will notice there's this weird quirk in PWCC where if you look at the bidding history, it's all private. So you can't see the feedback scores on the bidders. You can't tell like if you're bidding against somebody that has 1 feedback or 10 feedback or 12 feedback or whatever. Whereas if I'm bidding on an auction from just a private seller on eBay, you can always see the full transaction history. You can see if people retract their bids. You can see all this stuff that can give you clues about whether this is legit. With PWCC, no such luck, right? It's completely private auction history, which is a massive tailwind to all the shill bidders and the bid pumpers out there who just have a feeding frenzy sometimes over this stuff and just bid each other up, and you get all these all-time high prices for stuff. That's just people playing around, right? So that can make conservative investors like myself nervous and cause me to back out of certain auctions if I see behaviors or if I see signals that suggest to me that I'm getting shilled or I'm getting bid pumped by some of the sharks out there in the market. So we just talked a bunch about some of the pros and cons. I want to leave you all here with some insight into my personal strategy for kind of how I would think about doing things if I had a card that was a contender for a PWCC submission. So I'll give you a real world example, right? We've got our Joe Biden PSA 9 Topps cards that we just opened up yesterday on the channel. It's a weird card, right? It's pop 1 of 3. I own all 3 of them. There's only one of these that's higher in the entire PSA population pool. So it's a rare card, right? What am I going to do with this card, you may ask? I don't really know how much it's worth. You could argue it's worth nothing if you really don't like Joe Biden. You could argue it's worth maybe several $100s because it's a pretty rare find in a PSA slab. So I have no idea what it's worth. So here's the strategy that I've basically employed. I have listed the item myself at Buy It Now on my eBay page. I'm basically going to wait and see what happens. I did enable a Make Offers button. I set the price as high as I possibly could just to kind of see if people will take the bait or if people might be interested in the card at that price. I do want to kind of see how many watchers or offers I'm going to get from the card. And depending on what happens, maybe over time I'll bring the price down or I'll maybe enable the offers differently or something like that. And I'll just kind of see what happens. And it's possible that down the road, I might consider sending it to PWCC for consignment, just so it gets more visibility, because it is sort of an unprecedented item. There's no precedent on eBay of any sold listings. There's nothing like it on the market. It's a one-of-a-kind item currently for sale. So yeah, that's kind of my strategy for a card like that. I think in general as well, you could see my top bullet there. Anything that's cheap, guys, like if you've got stuff that's going to be worth less than 250 bucks, you may as well just try to sell it yourself, because stuff that's like in that price ballpark, you're not going to attract as much of the sharks or the scam artists as you will if you're dealing with a sealed box that's several $1,000s, if you're dealing with PSA 10 or PSA 9 first edition Yu-Gi-Oh cards that sometimes sell for several $100s or several $1,000s. That's the kind of stuff you may want to think about sending to PWCC versus trying to go it alone. So, okay guys, that's it here for this video. I hope you enjoyed the content. I realize there's going to be some controversial points that I raised in this presentation, so Please feel free to comment down below with things that you disagreed with, things you think I may have mischaracterized or gotten wrong. As always, folks, appreciate the time. This is the Parkside Merchants channel. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.